Hockey season is coming, friends. Boston Bruins at Warrior Ice Arena today for the captain's practice. And on the podcast, I am joined by Armando Velez of Locked On Panthers to discuss each team since that playoff round back in April and the outlook for 2023-24. So let's get into it, shall we?
You're Locked On Bruins, your daily podcast on the Boston Bruins. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What is up, Bruins fans, and welcome back to Locked On Boston Bruins. I'm your host, Ian McLaren, and this is a daily show where we discuss all things Spoke to Be. Today is Tuesday, September 5th. Happy back to school for everyone up here in Canada anyways, in Ontario. Sent our three boys off this morning. And more importantly, for the purposes of this podcast, black and gold back on the ice with a very sweet Spoke to Be at center ice at Warrior Ice Arena for the captain's practice. No captain, of course, but a lot of Bruins are gathered, and we're ramping things up towards training camp. Today on the podcast, I'm joined by Armando Velez of Locked On Panthers to discuss a whole bunch of topics in terms of both teams, where they've been since the playoffs, the outlook for this coming season. Quick reminder that we're still on 3 shows per week until September 18th, and that's when we'll be back to daily podcasts. You're going to want to subscribe to Locked On Boston Bruins on your favorite podcast app, as well as on YouTube, so that you don't miss a thing this coming season. Become an everydayer and catch all the latest on the black and gold here on Locked On Boston Bruins. Quick reminder, the podcast available on social media at Locked NHL Bruins. You can find me at Ian C. McLaren. And without further ado, let's get to this special Bruins-Panthers crossover edition featuring Armando. All right, well, I guess it's fitting to kick off a new season here by getting together with Armando, seeing as his Florida Panthers ended the Boston Bruins season back in April. Oh, man. Armando, you've had a much shorter off season than I have, and I guess I'll start just by asking, are the expectations in Florida this year a bit higher than they were going into last season? Or, was the playoff run kind of what's to be expected for the Panthers coming into 2023-24?
Yeah, when it comes to just the overall season as a whole off season, and everything that the Florida Panthers went through with hiring a new head coach, bringing in Matthew Tkachuk. I mean, this was let's not forget that this Florida Panthers team was a Pittsburgh Penguins win away against Chicago.
I think about that all the time.
The playoffs, and also Pittsburgh beating Columbus too, as well in the last game of the season. They were wins; those wins from other teams away from not even qualifying for the Stanley Cup playoffs. And it's crazy what the discussion points this offseason would have been had they not made it. I mean, I think Paul Maurice his seat would definitely be hot coming into this one, but it's crazy what has happened since April 30th of 2023 when the Florida Panthers did go into the TD Garden and win Game 7 on the road. But yeah, as far as that, the Florida Panthers have quite a few injuries going into this upcoming season. I mean, with Aaron Ekblad fractured his leg in Game 2 in the Boston series and played through it. He didn't know it was broken until in between the Leafs and the Hurricanes series. Crazy. Still kept on playing. Even scored a goal in Game 5 of the Stanley Cup Final. Even crazy to think. Montour is going to be missing some time as well. Was offensively Brandon Montour carrying it on from the Boston series to Toronto series. I mean, fell off a little bit offensively until the Stanley Cup Final, but he's going to miss some time as well. But the Florida Panthers have guys coming in, including defenseman Mike Riley, who the Boston Bruins bought out. I saw that the dead cap hit is going to be $333K and then 1.3 next year. So a good cap savings for the Bees this upcoming season. But not only Mike Riley, Oliver Ekman-Larsson, who got bought out by the Vancouver Canucks as well. Nico Mikkola, who has a cap-friendly and team-friendly deal for the Florida Panthers. And my favorite signing of this offseason for the Florida Panthers, Evan Rodriguez, who's played with Nathan McKinnon and Sidney Crosby in the last 2 seasons. A late bloomer when it comes to his success in the NHL, and he's likely going to be playing on that top line with Alexander Barkov. Matthew Tkachuk, after that broken sternum, he's expected to start the season. Eetu Luostarinen, who broke his who fractured his tibia in the Carolina series, is expected to start the season as well. So there's a little bit of ups and downs when it comes to the injury front for the Florida Panthers. But as far as what's in place, the core is still in place, the coaching staff is still in place for the Florida Panthers. So, it's really going to be telling these first 10-ish, 15-ish games for the Panthers on what's it gonna be. I mean, the Panthers started 4-1-1 last year, and then went on and then the wheels kind of fell off in the beginning of the season last year. So are we expecting necessarily that this upcoming season? I think the Panthers are going to find a way to stay afloat. I mean, coming off the 1996 playoff run to the Stanley Cup final, which they got swept by Colorado, they got a better start of the season in that one. Bill Lindsay was talking about it on Territory Talk, the official Florida Panthers podcast. So there's really a chance, especially like I said, a lot of guys has something to prove as the guys. I mean, the Panthers had to work with what they got as far as the cap crunch. They were not going to get a Dmitry Orlov, especially with what Carolina paid him. So they were gonna have to navigate a lot of short-term signings, as we saw all throughout the NHL, 1 to 2 year signings. None of these 7-8 year deals.
Yeah. And the Bruins, we'll talk about that I'm sure later, but the Bruins certainly had their fill of value signings this offseason. There's a couple guys I wanted to ask you about specifically. One, or kind of the goaltending situation. You have Bobrovsky, who had this amazing playoff run to lead the Cats to the Stanley Cup final. You have Anthony Stolarz, who they signed, but you also have Spencer Knight, who's out of the player assistance program, has a pretty good sized contract, even more than what Jeremy Swayman was awarded in arbitration this past summer. $4.5 million over the next 3 years. What's the outlook on him coming into this season? Will it kind of be a split with Bobrovsky? Where does Stolarz fit in? How's the goaltending situation going to shake out?
I think it's really going to be telling from the first week of camp, just depending on who's going to work with which group as well. And the fact that Stolarz has some experience being in the NHL for a few seasons. I mean, doesn't have even a full season's worth of games under his belt, but neither does Spencer Knight as well. He's only in his he's only going into his 4th season in the NHL. I mean, if you include the 4 games that he played in the regular season back in 2021, thankfully the Panthers were able to burn that year off his entry level deal. They matched the contract terms for when Bobrovsky's contract expires. It's the highest paid goalie tandem in the entire league. I mean, this was a conversation that was spoken about even last season before Spencer Knight signed his deal. But it's a very, very fluid situation for the Cats. And thankfully with Spencer Knight, he is waivers exempt for the Florida Panthers. He's likely going to make the original 23-man roster, but after waiver claims and all that stuff, which the Florida Panthers are really are a team that's really aggressive when it comes to that. I mean, we see Gus Forsling, Josh Mahura. As soon as the 23-man roster is announced, maybe we could see an opportunity, a chance that after a waiver claim that Spencer Knight will be sent down to AHL Charlotte. Chances are, just to see what you have in Stolarz. As far as the splits, I think it's going to be somewhere between 70-30, somewhere around there. Bobrovsky to Stolarz to start the year, maybe 60-40 as well. But we are going to see Sergei Bobrovsky come out with most of the starts. I mean, and listen, coming off a playoff run where Sergei Bobrovsky, I mean, think about this. He gave up 7 goals in game 2 against the again. Well, he was pulled. He was pulled in game 2, but the Panthers gave up 7 goals and then 9 in game 5.
Mm-hmm.
And still his save percentage for the entire postseason was still 915. Just
Yeah.
goes to show how great the second and third round was for Sergei
Yeah.
Bobrovsky.
Yeah, for
And
sure.
and you want to give the $10 million man, 2-time Vezina Trophy winner, an opportunity to get a good amount of those starts in the season,
Yeah, definitely.
especially because every single time that there was a threat of Sergei Bobrovsky's crease being taken away, he's always came up big and proven to the organization why he's gotten that contract. Has it really worked out? Has it really worked out to as well as we've wanted it to? Not necessarily. Some of the regular seasons, especially if you look at the numbers, hasn't been is a little head scratching when you look at it. But
Yeah.
this most recent playoff run, you see, okay, you see
Yeah.
why the Dale Talon originally signed him to that 7-year,
For
$70
sure.
million deal.
And one other guy I wanted to ask you about is a highly touted prospect who's, I think, entering the last year of his entry-level deal, Anton Lindell. I look at the Panthers. He seems like a guy who could kind of step up and break out and kind of help them carry things offensively, especially with some guys leaving like Anthony Duclair. Is he primed for a breakout this season, you think, Lundell?
That's the hope, especially with how he's performed him in that Ryan and on him with the same line as Sam Reinhart, especially
Right.
in the Leaf series where you saw that how much Anton Lindell's game has grown. And this is something that I've spoken about all offseason is Bill Zito needs to find a way to extend Lundell before game 1 of the regular season, because the Panthers, they're going to have a whole bunch of expiring contracts going into next season.
Right.
And the average amount of AAV that you can to fill in the open roster spots will be around $2 million per player.
Yep.
So it's not a lot of
Yeah.
room to work with. So you gotta make sure if you do extend Anton Lundell, that you do it before he does break out.
Right,
And
right.
I mean, you look at an example of Tage Thompson in Buffalo, the value that they're getting there. Cole Caulfield and Nick Suzuki with the Montreal Canadiens. That's going to be great value contracts there. So I'm hoping that for the Florida Panthers' sake, that it's done before the season starts, because if you see that he definitely breaks out and you see like 20-25 goals for Lundell, he's going to go back to the negotiating table and say, hey, I deserve more money.
Yeah, for sure. I actually traded for him in a keeper league this past summer, so I'm hoping that he gets that 20 to 25 goals. That would be really great for me personally. Coming up after the break, Armando's going to ask some questions about the Boston Bruins and everything they've been through since that disappointing loss in the opening round, as well as the outlook for this season. But first, a quick word from today's sponsor, our friends over at AG1, a foundational nutrition supplement that supports whole body health. AG1 is a replacement for your multivitamin, probiotic, and more in one simple drinkable habit. They have science-driven formulation of vitamins, probiotics, and whole food sourced nutrients. They're raising the standard for quality in the supplement category, and they help you build your health foundation first. A lot of great athletes have one thing in common, and they take care of their bodies. And this is a micro habit that delivers macro benefits, helps just about everybody take great care of their health. If a comprehensive solution is what you need from your supplement routine, then try AG1 and get a free 1-year supply of vitamin D and 5 free AG1 travel packs with your first purchase. All you have to do is go to drinkag1.com/NHL network. That's drinkag1.com/NHL network. Check it out today and start reaping those benefits.
And welcome back to this special crossover edition between the Locked On Florida Panthers podcast and Locked On Boston Bruins podcast. Thank you once again for making both of our podcasts your first listen of the day. So, Ian, as far as these two teams, I see a lot of. I wrote down a little bit of a Venn diagram here as far as the differences and similarities based on both of these teams coming off a President's Trophy season. I mean, the Panthers lost a defenseman as far as a rental in Ben Sherratt the season prior, just like how
Right.
the Boston Bruins lost Dmitry Orlov. Tyler Bertuzzi as far as a forward, Claude Giroux for
Drew, yeah.
the Panthers. Difference is you're staying consistent with the coach. Goalie tandem is returning, the Jennings Trophy tandem, and as well as the Vezina winner in Linus Ullmark. However, and also another similarity, dead cap on the roster coming into the next season.
Yeah.
4.5 million in bonuses from Patrice Bergeron and David Krejci, even though they're not on the team anymore and retired. But also like I said in the last sentence, the top two centers for the Boston Bruins no longer being there in Bergeron and Krejci. So for the Boston Bruins' sake, Pavel Zacha is the number one center. Charlie Coyle is expected to be the 2C as far as when we look at daily faceoff. What's your confidence level in the center depth? Because, in order to really make a difference as far as wins and losses and especially zone time, it starts up the middle for each NHL team.
Yeah, I mean, that's obviously the biggest weakness for the Boston Bruins coming into this season. You look pretty much everywhere else in the lineup, and they have all-world players in net. Like you said, Vezina Trophy winner, Jennings tandem, in Linus Ullmark, Jeremy Swayman. You have two guys who were in the Norris conversation last year in Hampus Lindholm and Charlie McAvoy. On the wings, David Pastrnak was a Hart Trophy finalist. Brad Marchand still up there. Jake DeBrusk looking to kind of build on his successful season last year. But that center position, if you looked just at, and I'll probably do this at some point heading into the season, kind of ranking center depth among Eastern Conference teams, the Bruins are, would be a lottery team just based on their center position. I always like to say you kind of look at the lineup in training camp heading into opening night. Then you look at the lineup after the trade deadline. And then finally, hopefully, ideally, heading into the playoffs and seeing who's healthy, who's all there. Whether or not the Bruins can add something down the middle during the season, this is probably more likely next offseason that they'll really try to fill that position. But it's possible that they could try to add something mid-season, although they're pretty limited in terms of assets that they can give up. We did see in that series against the Panthers that Charlie Coyle and Brad Marchand had some chemistry there. Pavel Zacha has played with David Pastrnak pretty extensively last season, so they're kind of hoping that those duos will keep going. And don't forget, the Bruins, without Patrice Bergeron, they built a 3-1 lead on the Panthers in the playoffs. So there is a sense that they can kind of get by for the time being with those two guys. Zacha, there's a lot of expectations that he will build on his career year from last year. But at the end of the day, yeah, it's not a great situation. And hopefully they have some long-term targets there. There's not really anything internally that they can count on in a year or two. Morgan Geekie's a nice add as their third line center, and hopefully he'll find a bit more success with greater opportunity. But yeah, if you're matching up against a Barkov, you're not gonna come out on top with Zacha or Charlie Coyle, that's for sure.
Yeah, and Barkov spoke with Elliot Friedman of 32 Thoughts, saying that with Bergeron retiring, his face-off percentage will go up. Like Sasha Barkov, he's a low-key, pretty funny guy.
Yeah, that was pretty funny.
Sure. That's what a lot of players definitely say about him. And I mean, these two teams, what they have in common, I mean, two of the top wingers in the NHL, and Tkachuk and David Pastrnak. I mean, we could also include Mitch Marner there as far as top wingers in the NHL. But also, one thing that I think of when it comes to this Bruins team going into the regular season is possibly the need to stay afloat. About $500,000 in cap space that they have at this moment in time, but also the need to bring a veteran presence in the locker room as well. James Van Riemsdyk is part of it, coming from the Philadelphia Flyers. Kevin Shattenkirk coming from the Anaheim Ducks, and bringing back Milan Lucic, who was on their 2011 and 2013 Stanley Cup runs. But looking at their ages, 34, 34, and 35 as well. It's a little bit of that. That was definitely that stood out to me. The ages there, and with the Florida Panthers coming off their President's Trophy season, I was saying all year that this was considered their gap year. Go before the next season when things open up. Luckily for the Bruins, there's expected to be a $4 million salary cap rise. When the Panthers came off their President's Trophy winning season, it was only a $1 million rise as far as the salary cap space. So is that like a little bit of a light at the end of the tunnel as far as how you're viewing it?
I think so. Yeah. I mean, you mentioned the bonus overages for Bergeron and Krejci. That's like $4.5 million in dead cap space. That's a pretty good winger or a center that you could have added right there. You combine that coming off the books with the cap going up, and hopefully they could have, $8 million available there to add. Now they will have some guys looking for extensions. Jake DeBrusk specifically can be an unrestricted free agent next summer. And he came out last week and said he wants to be a Bruin for the foreseeable future. That's a couple years after making a public trade request. But yeah, signing some of these guys to 1 year, $1 million contracts, it will free up a lot of space for next offseason. Derek Forbort will come off the books as well. Matt Grzelcyk will be an unrestricted free agent. There's a lot of money available for next offseason, and still some pretty prominent unrestricted free agents. I know they have their eyes on Elias Lindholm in Calgary. There's been talk of Mark Scheifele from Winnipeg. We'll see what they're able to attract in the open market if these guys do go there. But certainly between some younger guys who might be able to step up, and they still have a pretty solid core in McAvoy, Pastrnak, the two goalies, Lindholm. Yeah, for sure. These guys are all signed long-term. Zacha signed for 4 years. So they have some pieces in place. That center position, the glaring weakness, and hopefully those other guys on the wings and net on defense can entice some guys to make the jump over to Boston. I mean, you mentioned Elliot Friedman on their podcast, 32 Thoughts. They've always talked about how the Bruins just always seem to find a way to get the pieces together. Obviously, they've sacrificed a lot of the future, in terms of draft picks, but Boston remains a destination, and there's a good core in place there and a good culture in place there that guys want to be a part of. So hopefully that will serve them in free agency next summer.
Yeah, one thing that these two teams as well have in common is whenever you're going for it, and just goes to show that selling the farm to try to win. I mean, it's not only the Boston Bruins and the Florida Panthers from two seasons apart, but the New York Rangers as of recent as well. I mean, Colorado Avalanche, they were able to win the cup as well with selling the farm, but it's not always a success whenever you do sell the farm for sure. That moment. But hey, this is what it's all about, trying to win a Stanley Cup as well. So can't blame GMs for that. For sure. So we're going to transition over to our third and final segment, where we're going to discuss are we expecting both of these teams to be playoff bound? Are we expecting one to miss, or are we expecting the possible postseason finishes as well for these two franchises? We're going to discuss that more here on this crossover edition of the Locked On Florida Panthers podcast and Locked On Boston Bruins. Welcome back to this crossover edition of the Locked On Florida Panthers podcast and Locked On Boston Bruins. Thank you once again for making Locked On Panthers and Locked On Bruins your first listen of the day. And Ian, it's centered up like we spoke about with the Boston Bruins as far as it being a concern.
Yep.
Light at the end of the tunnel. But here's the thing. I had a gambling show last year with Jack from Paramount Sports, and there was one over under last year that I said that I was not going to touch as far as that, and it was the Boston Bruins over under as far as points. I believe it was 95.
Yeah, it was pretty low headed into last season. Yeah,
I'm very interested to see what the over under is going to be this year. I haven't seen anything as of recent, but again, I think this is another year where you can't. I would advise people not to touch it. And we spoke about two number one defensemen on two different pairs. That's such a luxury that the Boston Bruins have. A Jennings Trophy tandem there as well. A 60 goal scorer as far as winger in David Pastrnak, and like I said, and Brad Marchand as well, who was a pain in the butt for against the Florida Panthers as always. I mean, we didn't even mention this on the show. The Panthers were a Brad Marchand breakaway in Game 5 from being eliminated in 5 games. Let's not forget that.
Yep.
But I can't say with certainty that the Boston Bruins are going to miss the playoffs. I just can't. Even without Bergeron and Krejci. What says you?
I mean, yeah, just looking at FanDuel now, the Bruins over-under is 101.5. So, I mean, obviously they're going to take a huge tumble from where they were last season. They're not going to replicate the best regular season of all time. But in prioritizing keeping the league's best defense core together, minus Connor Clifton, you bring in Kevin Shattenkirk, maybe Ian Mitchell gets in there, but it's still the top 5 is still intact. You still have Swayman and Ullmark in net. They've clearly prioritized team defense and trying to scrape together some goals. The offense won't be as prolific, but I still think, yeah, they have the pieces in place to be a playoff team. You mentioned the President's Trophy earlier, and I talked about this a couple of times throughout the summer, that kind of President's Trophy plus 1 year where you get, I think you had the Capitals recently, the Avalanche, the Lightning. They all won the President's Trophy, flamed out in the playoffs, and then the next season, and the Panthers included in this, they went to the Stanley Cup final, and a few of these teams won. Is that in the cards for the Bruins? I mean, that may be a bit of a stretch, but get in, you never know. Obviously, in the Atlantic, there's some up-and-coming teams like the Buffalo Sabres, who are, I think they finished, like a point behind the Panthers last year. Senators, I don't think Detroit is quite there yet. Montreal, definitely not. Ottawa is debatable, but I think Buffalo's, of any of those Atlantic teams, right there in terms of challenging for a playoff spot. You could argue Tampa and Toronto, maybe not as good as last season. I mean, it's a real crapshoot in the Atlantic Division, and then you take into account whether teams from the Metro can come in and steal one of those wildcard spots. This time last year, I was thinking the Bruins probably a wildcard team. I mean, I'll probably say the same thing again. I don't want to guarantee the playoffs because of that center depth issue, but I think they will still find a way. People are going to underestimate them coming into the season, I think, and that core of McAvoy, Pastrnak, the goalies, I think there's still enough there to be a playoff team for sure. I think. Yeah, I don't know.
Yeah,
Panthers, you thinking they're pretty much a lock? Can they sneak into the top 3? You think?
It's crazy. It's crazy because when there's that possibility of a hangover. Not gonna lie, when it comes to losing in the Stanley Cup final. I mean, crazy to think that the Panthers, they got 9 days off in between the Eastern Conference final and Stanley Cup final, and still they were battered with injuries.
Yeah.
When it came to the final round. Not that it's an excuse. I mean, I think even if they were fully healthy, I don't think they would be beating the Vegas Golden Knights. I mean, you saw how the Panthers, as far as more physical, as far as the Vegas Golden Knights being more physical and basically stealing their lunch money in that final
Yeah.
round. And here's the thing with this team, again, with now this franchise. It's crazy in the 30-year history of the Panthers, 30th anniversary, for the Florida Panthers, that with now this is the 4th straight season that they've made the postseason. Longest streak
Oh, wow.
ever.
Yep.
And prior to that, they had a 10 plus year drought of not making the postseason, which was recently broken by the Buffalo Sabres. And really, when it comes to the Kachuk factor, Barkov is still in the mix. Still questions with Aaron Ekblad and Brandon Montour on their health. George Richards of Florida Hockey Now did point out that Montour is likely expected to be the first one of the two to return, especially because there's online videos of his rehab as well, as far as that's what's been posted. But I don't see a reason why they can't make it back to the postseason. And at this point, I've never seen a long postseason run from them. And the fact that they did it as an 8th seed, and we've even seen it in their state rival in the Tampa Bay Lightning, that just get through the season, don't overexert yourself, make sure. And like I said, both of these teams, the Boston Bruins and the Panthers, in their President's Trophy winning season, what did they have in common? They were not challenged throughout the regular season. They did not face a lot of adversity. So flamed out in the postseason. And I think the fact that the Panthers went through their fair share of adversity to get there really helped them this time around. And I think it could be the same thing again, knowing that there's nothing that's guaranteed every single night in the NHL, and anyone could beat anyone. And the fact that for the Panthers, that experience of playing a month and a half to 2 more months of hockey, and the traveling, the media coverage as well, I think it's gonna really it's really gonna. I'm not guaranteeing a Stanley Cup final appearance again. I don't even know what to predict as far as finish, but I am expecting the Florida Panthers to at least challenge for another first round win, at least, because this is the building blocks. I mean, Colorado went through their fair share of heartbreak as well before winning the cup, being unable to get to round 2. I mean, Tampa Bay Lightning, they went to a Stanley Cup final in 2015. Yep. They went to an Eastern Conference final in 2018 before losing to the Capitals. I mean, they have experience under them now, and I think that's really good for this core moving forward. And the experience of the head coach in Paul Maurice, who's been to multiple Stanley Cup finals. I know it's been 20 years apart between the two, but I think that's very valuable that you have a coach that's consistently, at least for the most part, even keeled. You'll see him go off on his players from time to time, especially that game in Toronto. But you'll know that you'll have a coach that knows how to stay the course.
Yeah. And speaking of coaches, hopefully Jim Montgomery has learned. I think you could argue that, Paul Maurice outcoached. You could easily argue that Maurice outcoached Montgomery in that series, made the goalie change when necessary, and pushed some different buttons. And hopefully Montgomery has learned some stuff and can apply those into the playoffs as well. I think Toronto is probably the best team in the Atlantic. And then after that, it's pretty wide open. That's going to be interesting to see how things play out. And I don't know about the Panthers, but the Bruins practicing today, gathering for their captain's practice without a captain. And we're getting close to some preseason action opening night. I'm pretty excited, and I'm sure we'll connect at some point again during the regular season. Armando, remind everybody before we log off where they can find Locked On Panthers and where they can find you on social media.
They can find me on X at Bondoman12. Follow the show account on Twitter at X and Instagram at LO_FLA Panthers. How about you, Ian?
Podcast is at Locked NHL Bruins, and I am at Ian C. McLaren. Still not used to calling it X, but they're good call with that. And Armando, it's going to be a great season, and all the best. I'm sure we will connect, probably previewing some of these Bruins Panthers games in the regular season.
Looking forward to it, my friend.
All right, take care.